I never thought I could kill anyone. Then I did, and felt nothing.
Never believe them when they say the enemy is evil, because that's exactly how they turn you into a killer. What I'm about to show you will make you question everything you think you know about good and evil. Because the scariest truth about war isn't the bombs or bullets, it's how easily your mind can be hijacked to do things you never thought possible. By the end of this video, you'll understand the terrifying psychology that transforms ordinary people into instruments of violence, and why you might not be as different from history's darkest figures as you'd like to believe. Throughout history, we've sent millions of people to fight wars. Teachers, farmers, students, parents, regular folks who wouldn't hurt a fly in their daily lives. Yet somehow, these same people end up doing unthinkable things on battlefields. The question that haunts psychologists isn't why monsters commit atrocities, it's why normal people do. War doesn't just kill bodies, it rewires brains. It takes the human mind, with all its natural empathy and moral boundaries, and systematically breaks it down. Then it rebuilds that mind into something else entirely, something that can kill without hesitation, follow orders without question, and sleep peacefully after doing horrible things. The process starts long before the first shot is fired. It begins with something psychologists call dehumanization. Before you can kill someone, you have to stop seeing them as human. This isn't some abstract concept. It's a deliberate, calculated process that happens in every single conflict. During World War II, Nazi propaganda didn't just call Jewish people enemies. They called them rats, vermin, a disease that needed to be eliminated. In Rwanda, radio stations spent months calling Tutsis cockroaches before the genocide began. In every war, the enemy becomes animals, monsters, anything except what they really are, human beings with families, dreams, and fears just like everyone else. But here's what's truly chilling. This propaganda works on everyone, not just the people pulling triggers. Civilians back home start cheering for violence against these so-called monsters. They donate money, support policies, and elect leaders who promise to be even more brutal. The entire society becomes complicit in dehumanization. Once the enemy stops being human in your mind, empathy shuts off like a light switch. You can't feel sorry for a cockroach. You can't have mercy on a rat. And that's exactly the point. The second psychological weapon is obedience to authority. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted one of the most disturbing experiments in history. He told ordinary people to give electric shocks to strangers. The shocks weren't real, but the participants didn't know that. They thought they were actually hurting people. Here's what happened. When someone in a lab coat told them to continue, 65% of people delivered what they believed were lethal electric shocks to innocent strangers. Not soldiers, not criminals, not psychopaths, regular people from all walks of life. They heard screaming, begging, and pleading from the other room, but they kept pushing that button because an authority figure told them to. Think about that for a second. 2/3 of people will torture a stranger to death just because someone in charge says it's necessary. In war, this obedience becomes a weapon more powerful than any bomb. Military training doesn't just teach you how to shoot straight. It programs unquestioning obedience into your nervous system. You learn to follow commands instantly, without thinking, without hesitating. And when that command is to kill, most soldiers do it automatically. The third psychological trick is moral disengagement. This is how good people convince themselves that bad actions are actually okay. It starts with small compromises and gradually escalates. First, you tell yourself you're just following orders. You're not responsible, you're just doing your job. Then you start believing the ends justify the means. We have to do this terrible thing to prevent something even worse. Finally, you flipped the script entirely. The victims deserved it. They brought it on themselves. They would have done the same to you. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who studied the psychology of killing, found that soldiers use these mental tricks constantly. They don't see themselves as murderers. They see themselves as heroes protecting their country, their brothers, their way of life. The human mind is incredibly good at rewriting reality to protect itself from guilt. But perhaps the most powerful force is tribalism and groupthink. In combat, your unit becomes your entire world. These people eat with you, sleep next to you, and depend on you for their lives. The bonds become stronger than family. When everyone around you is doing something, it stops feeling wrong. If your buddies are shooting prisoners and your sergeant isn't stopping them and your lieutenant is looking the other way, then it must be normal. It must be necessary. The group validates behavior that would horrify you under normal circumstances. This isn't just theory. We've seen it play out in real life over and over again. To My Lai massacre in Vietnam. On the 16th of March, 1968, American soldiers entered a village and killed over 500 civilians. Men, women, children, babies, none of them were combatants. These weren't hardened criminals or psychopaths. They were regular American boys, drafted from small towns across the country. How did it happen? The soldiers had been told the village was full of enemy fighters. They'd lost friends to hidden bombs and sniper attacks. They were scared, angry, and looking for someone to blame. Their officers either participated or stayed silent. In that moment, with adrenaline pumping and the group dynamic taking over, moral boundaries collapsed completely. Some soldiers later said they knew it was wrong but felt powerless to stop it. Others convinced themselves the villagers were enemy sympathizers who deserved to die. A few broke down mentally and never recovered. But in that moment, the psychology of war overrode everything they'd been taught about right and wrong. Or look at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. American soldiers tortured detainees in ways that shocked the world when the photos leaked. These weren't special forces or intelligence operatives. They were regular military police, including women, college graduates, people who'd never shown violent tendencies before. The investigation revealed a perfect storm of psychological factors. The soldiers were stressed, poorly supervised, and operating in a moral vacuum. They started with small humiliations and gradually escalated to sexual abuse and torture. Each step felt justified by the previous one. The group dynamic made everything seem normal, even funny. One of the soldiers later said she felt like she was in a different world where different rules applied. That's exactly how the psychology of war works. It creates alternate realities where normal moral rules don't exist. The scariest part isn't that these things happened, it's how predictable they were. Psychologists who study group dynamics and authority could have told you exactly what would happen in those situations. Put normal people in abnormal circumstances, remove oversight, add stress and fear, and you get atrocities. This same pattern repeats throughout history. The Holocaust wasn't carried out by a handful of Nazi fanatics. It required the participation of hundreds of thousands of ordinary Germans. Police officers, train conductors, government clerks, factory workers, regular people doing their jobs in an evil system. Hannah Arendt called it the banality of evil. Evil doesn't require monsters, it just requires normal people who stop thinking for themselves and start following orders. Even before soldiers reach the battlefield, their minds are being shaped by propaganda. Governments and media don't just report on conflicts, they actively manufacture consent for violence. It starts with emotional stories. You hear about atrocities committed by the enemy, but rarely about your own side's mistakes. You see images of victims who look like you, but the enemy victims are just statistics. Patriotic music plays while soldiers march. Flags wave while politicians give speeches about honor and duty. This isn't accidental. It's psychological warfare designed to make you support violence. And it works on everyone, not just soldiers. Civilians become cheerleaders for war, demanding more aggressive action, celebrating when enemies die. During World War I, British propaganda convinced an entire generation of young men that dying in trenches was glorious. Mothers gave their sons white feathers if they refused to enlist, shaming them as cowards. The whole society became invested in the mythology of heroic warfare, even as millions died in meaningless battles. The same techniques work today. Social media algorithms feed you content that confirms your existing beliefs and makes you angrier at the other side. News channels frame conflicts to support their political agenda. Politicians use fear and patriotism to justify military spending and foreign interventions. Before you know it, you're cheering for violence against people you've never met, in countries you couldn't find on a map, for reasons you don't fully understand. The propaganda has done its job. But here's the really unsettling question. If you lived in Nazi Germany, would you have been different? If you were a young American in Vietnam, would you have refused orders at My Lai? If you were guarding prisoners at Abu Ghraib, would you have blown the whistle? Most people immediately say yes, of course they would have been different. They would have been the exception, the hero who stood up against injustice. But psychology suggests otherwise. Remember, the soldiers who committed these atrocities weren't specially selected for cruelty. They were random people, just like you. They had the same moral education, the same basic human decency, the same belief that they were good people. Yet when put in extreme situations, most of them broke down. The Milgram experiment proves that most people will commit atrocities when pressured by authority figures. The Stanford prison experiment showed how quickly normal people become abusive when given power over others. Study after study reveals the same uncomfortable truth. Under the right circumstances, almost anyone can become a perpetrator. This doesn't mean everyone is secretly evil. It means human psychology has built-in vulnerabilities that can be exploited. We're social animals who depend on group acceptance for survival. We're wired to follow leaders and conform to social norms. These traits helped our ancestors survive, but they can be weaponized in modern conflicts. The most frightening aspect of war psychology isn't that it creates monsters. It's that it doesn't need to. It just needs to temporarily override the moral systems that normally guide behavior. And those systems are more fragile than we'd like to admit. Understanding this isn't about making excuses for war crimes or reducing personal responsibility. People still choose their actions, and those choices have consequences. But if we want to prevent future atrocities, we need to understand how normal people become capable of committing them. We need to recognize the warning signs when our own society starts dehumanizing enemies. We need to question authority figures who demand unthinking obedience. We need to resist propaganda that makes violence seem necessary or heroic. And we need to strengthen the institutions and cultural norms that protect human dignity, even in extreme circumstances. Most importantly, we need to accept the uncomfortable truth that we're not naturally immune to these psychological forces. Recognizing our own vulnerability is the first step toward protecting ourselves and others from the dark psychology of war. The human capacity for both good and evil isn't determined by some people being born different. It's determined by the situations we find ourselves in and the choices we make in those moments. War creates situations that bring out the worst in human nature, but understanding how that process works gives us the power to resist it. Hit like and subscribe if you'd like to see more deep dives into the psychology that shapes our world.